I have kept this hidden for decades, buried deep inside psychological exercises and sleepless nights. Empathy is not always a gift sometimes. It is a terrifying curse. Have you ever felt yourself drowning in someone else's sadness or anxiety, unable to escape? In that moment, you are not just listening to their story, you are becoming them in that very instant. That is when the Empath Awakening happens, when a person feels so deeply that the boundary between self and the world dissolves. Many people worship sensitivity, but Carl Jung warned, anything in excess creates a dangerous shadow. The shadow of the empath is exhaustion, loss of identity, and a profound fear of carrying the weight of the entire world. Are you living your own life, or a life shaped by the borrowed emotions of others? Today, we will decode the mystery of the Empath Awakening, recover the self that has been lost, and learn how to become a grounded, boundary-owning empath, rather than a victim of your own kindness, based on the philosophies of Carl Jung. 1. Portrait of the Empath. A genius hidden in gentleness. Have you ever wondered why the soft yellow light in the living room at night so easily lulls you into quiet? I often think that, amid the ticking of the clock and that gentle light, we are like old radios set on the windowsill. Some people turn up the volume, some turn it down, and there are those who, all their lives, only listen to a very private frequency, a frequency most of the world simply passes by, never noticing. Strangely, some radios always seem to know when the rain is coming, that can sense loneliness seeping into the house from empty streets, but never dare to say a word. Do you see yourself in that image? I used to be that way too. I grew up in a family where laughter was never lacking, but real hugs were rare. As a child, I learned to listen more than to speak up. At school, I was the one who remembered every little detail about friends, about what made them sad, but I rarely ever told anyone about my own story. At parties, I was always the last one cleaning up, not because I enjoyed cleaning, but because I didn't want anyone to feel troubled if I left too soon. Maybe you've been like that too, apologizing when you accidentally spill a drink, giving up your words when you want to say something, hiding your tears just to be a support for someone else. If that's true, then I think you'll understand what I mean. Empaths, in this country, often do not have any particularly special appearance. It could be the mother who wakes up early to make breakfast for the whole family, but is always the last one to eat. Or the uncle at the supermarket who quietly gives up his cart for a stranger. Or the colleague who silently remembers the day you had a hard time, even though no one asked them to do so. This gentleness does not come from weakness, but from a sophisticated ability, a finely tuned emotional system that can read the atmosphere with just a slight movement, a small change on the other person's face. Sometimes, they are the only ones who notice the room is heavy, even while everyone else is still laughing and chatting loudly. I once met a man named Mark at a yoga class for seniors in the suburbs of Denver. Mark did not stand out. He always chose the mat at the back of the room, never fought to speak, only quietly helped everyone fold blankets and clean the floor before leaving. Once, in the cold season, a newcomer, a young woman with red, puffy eyes, clearly having just been through something tough, joined the class. Mark was the first person to gently place a cup of hot tea next to her, without asking questions or intruding. That small gesture, I know, was not random. Mark had read a language others could not see, trembling hands, anxious eyes, a breath held tight in her chest. Only those who have lived in the land of silence can be that perceptive. Psychology researcher Elaine Aron, in her renowned work, has called people like Mark highly sensitive persons, HSP, individuals whose nervous systems are exceptionally sensitive. They receive and process emotional signals more intensely than normal, even if they themselves do not always realize it. Aron has shown that over 15% of the American population has these traits, and that does not equate to any kind of disorder or instability. In fact, Aron found that these HSPs are often the ones who detect risks in the community first, know how to calm tense situations, and are, in essence, the silent emotional gatekeepers that society cannot do without. But the paradox is that these emotional geniuses are often victims of misunderstanding. I once spoke with a middle-aged businesswoman, Linda, who runs a chain of coffee shops in California. Linda shared that throughout her years of taking care of her customers, she was constantly criticized as being too soft, too sensitive, or making everything complicated. It was only when a depressed customer thanked her for noticing the warning signs and helping in time that Linda began to believe that her ability to see more, feel more, was a kind of gift, not a weakness as she had once believed. Carl Jung, in his studies of the ego and the individual's fragmentation, once commented, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That's right. What pains the empath most is not sensitivity, but the sense that they always have to fix themselves to fit in with the outside world. We learn to step back, hide our wounds, and only dare to open up when we're sure no one is judging. Many empaths spend their whole lives playing a supporting role, apologizing for even their own existence. But you know, that sensitive brain is actually a sophisticated data scanning system, a vast archive of other people's expressions, rhythms, and energies. A 2018 study published in Personality and Individual Differences showed that natural-born empaths are more than 80% better at detecting fake emotions than the average person. They are human lie detectors, but they themselves are manipulated and gaslighted by those around them into thinking they are just imagining things or being overly sensitive. Looking back on my own journey, I realized that living in gentleness also means living in the shadow of not being acknowledged. Every time you choose silence so others feel comfortable, every time you ignore your intuition just to keep the peace, that's one more time you bury your own special gift. If I could turn back time, I would tell myself and tell you, you are not a victim of emotion. You are the one holding the key to guide yourself and others. I have learned that this quiet strength only truly shines when you stop soothing your own pain by suppressing it. Instead, try to look directly at that gentleness, call it by its name, and let it become your motivation, not your burden. You have the right to ask questions when your intuition tells you something is not right. You can try keeping an emotional journal each day to spot recurring patterns in how you feel and respond. Don't be too quick to dismiss your sensitivity, because maybe that very quality will save someone on a day you never expected. Maybe you will have many nights lying under gentle lights, hearing the ticking of the clock and feeling a pang of being different. But I believe that if you dare to step into that inner room, you will see that gentleness is strength, not a sin. Sooner or later, you will realize you are not alone, because somewhere out there, on those quiet frequencies, there are other empathic souls waiting for you to speak up. Jung once emphasized, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. And I want you to know, you are not the background of anyone's story. You are the wavelength keeper, an emotional genius. It's just that you've never been allowed to see yourself that way. The journey to reclaim your identity begins the moment you stop apologizing for your existence and find the courage to step into the light, even if it's only a thin beam shining across the living room each night. 2. The invisible tragedy. When the empath becomes a victim of society and manipulators. Have you ever spent a long, sleepless night, the light from your bedside lamp casting strange shadows on the wall, making you wonder, which are the shadows of objects, and which are the shadows inside your own mind? Those are the times I feel like an old mirror, reflecting only the images of others, while I myself become increasingly faded. In the quiet of the night, I don't count sheep. I count the times I've apologized, the times I've wondered, am I just too sensitive? Beneath that gentle exterior lies a burning question. If I didn't see the pain, would it still exist? I remember clearly one day at the office, when I shared with a co-worker that a team member was showing signs of burnout. The answer I received was, "You're overthinking it. Everyone gets tired sometimes." A shrug, a sideways glance, and my concern was brushed aside. But a few weeks later, that co-worker actually collapsed, And I, the one who had seen it coming, became the one who blamed myself, no longer daring to speak up. Have you ever felt that way? Realized something was wrong, but when you shared it, all you received was denial or a gentle mockery. That is the beginning of the invisible tragedy that empaths often carry within themselves. From that moment on, I started observing myself, apologizing for what I sensed, telling myself to be a little less sensitive, trying to blend into conversations, even when my heart told me something was wrong. I met Anne, an old college friend, at a reunion. Anne was always someone who made others feel safe, but this time, she shared that lately she felt like she was disappearing in a crowded room, unable to distinguish her own emotions from the worries of others. "I'm just too sensitive now," Anne said with a sad smile. "Everyone says so I'm trying to act more normal." Anne's story is a mirror reflecting millions of empaths out there. Sensitive, quiet souls who constantly doubt themselves because no one ever validates the reality they perceive. Its strange society loves to praise sensitivity when it is paired with artistic genius, but is quick to belittle or dismiss it when it appears in everyday life. From an early age, many empaths are taught, "Don't take things too personally, toughen up, it's just a small thing." These seemingly harmless phrases over the years gradually become an internal script that makes them afraid to trust their own emotions. Empathy, as a result, is turned into a weakness, something to suppress or hide so as not to upset anyone. There is a frightening psychological depth behind this phenomenon. Gaslighting, when a person's feelings and perceptions are continuously denied and distorted by others, especially by manipulators. In 2020, a study by psychologist Robin Stern at Yale showed that gaslighting in relationships doesn't just appear in major incidents, but also seeps in through small behaviors: sarcasm, invalidation of experience, twisting the truth, gradually causing the empath to lose the ability to distinguish between intuition and illusion. That's why their tragedy is not a visible wound, but an invisible disorder in their own sense of self. I once heard the story of Raymond, a 50-something finance employee, always known for being a good listener and helping others. Raymond shared that for many years, his boss constantly told him he overthinks things, works less efficiently because he's too emotional, even though, in reality, he was always the first to warn of major project risks. When a serious loss occurred exactly as he had predicted, Raymond wasn't recognized. Instead, he was blamed for not warning forcefully enough. That vicious cycle repeated over and over, leading Raymond to begin believing he truly was unstable, that his perceptions were a flaw he needed to fix. Behind stories like Anne's or Raymond's lies a deeper social truth. Empaths often become the ideal victims for manipulators. Why? Because they are sensitive, easily moved by others' emotions, and so are easily drawn into psychological games. Manipulators are highly skilled at recognizing and exploiting compassion, turning it into a tool for control, manipulation, or escaping responsibility. They use guilt, shame, or simply subtle denial to make empaths constantly question themselves. Am I making too big a deal out of this? If I weren't so sensitive, wouldn't everything be so much easier? Carl Jung once wrote, "Shame is a soul-eating emotion." Shame and self-blame, these are the doors that open into long-term loneliness. When you begin to doubt the value of your own feelings, you also gradually lose the ability to connect with the world. Many empaths, instead of sharing their pain, choose to withdraw, becoming a faint shadow in someone else's life. They listen, they understand, but they no longer dare to ask anyone to listen in return. Each time that happens, the thread of inner connection frays a little more. I have met more than a few middle-aged people who, after years of being the emotional regulator for their family or workplace, suddenly feel themselves becoming invisible. "I no longer know who I am," one client once told me. "I just know I need to help everyone else feel better, and I feel more and more exhausted." Many empaths live their whole lives in a state that is half awake, half dreaming, fully aware of the pain of others, yet vague about their own suffering. In 2022, The New York Times published an article called "The Invisible Suffering of Empaths," telling the stories of middle-aged women who, after divorce, job loss, or losing a loved one, suddenly realized they had forgotten how to recognize joy and were left only with the ability to feel the sadness and worries of others. They described the feeling of being devoured by social expectations and by their own need to be recognized as the one who listens, the one who understands. From a biological perspective, Professor Richard Davidson, University of Wisconsin-Madison, pointed out in a 2016 study that the brain regions associated with empathy, the anterior insular and cingulate cortex, are highly active in people who are innately empathetic. But if this sensitivity is not reinforced by validation from their environment, it can shift into a state of emotional overload, leading to exhaustion, depression, or anxiety disorders. In other words, an emotional talent, if not used and protected properly, will gradually turn into a burden. So, what is the solution for this invisible tragedy? First, we need to name the truth. You are not hurt simply because you are sensitive. You are hurt because of your environment, because of society, and because manipulators have made you doubt yourself. This is not your fault. The truth is, you are observing you possess a silent weapon that not everyone has the courage to face. The next thing, I want you to try looking back at the times you were denied or gaslighted. Write them down, not to blame yourself, but to identify repeating patterns. Who are the people who tend to deny your feelings? In what situations do you withdraw? And when were the times you felt completely right, but were made to apologize? When you see clearly, you'll realize you're not overreacting. You're just accurately registering and reflecting reality. A practical exercise. Each day, spend a few minutes noting every time your intuition speaks up, whether it's a hunch about someone's mood or a sense that something's off in a conversation. After a few weeks, compare the accuracy of your intuition, right or wrong. Don't be surprised if you find yourself right most of the time. That is proof that you are not a victim of emotion, but someone who accurately records information about the world. And finally, remember Jung's words. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. No one can give you the right to be sensitive. It is your essence, a gift that needs to be nurtured, not hidden away. Sometimes, society and those around you are not ready to receive that. But the most important thing is that you, right now, dare to recognize and value what you feel. When you stop apologizing for your depth, you gradually step out of the shadow of invisible tragedy, moving toward the light of your true self. You may need time to learn to trust yourself again. There may still be long nights when the shadow on the wall looms larger than your fear. But remember, every step you dare to stand up and acknowledge your feelings is a step you reclaim ownership of your inner room, the place where all darkness is illuminated by your own true awareness. 3. The terrifying turning point. The moment of psychological sovereignty erupts. On Saturday morning, the park becomes busier as the sun rises, casting its light over the dew-soaked grass. Have you ever watched a stream of joggers, each carrying their own story, their faces marked with either determination or exhaustion? I once sat quietly on a bench, watching that flow of people the way I watch the flow of my own life, trying to blend into the rhythm, running while swallowing everything I wanted to say, all those emotions that never got a chance to be heard. On mornings like that, I realized just how long I had been running from myself. For many empaths, the turning point in life does not arrive with dramatic external upheaval, but from an internal breaking point, a moment when a fragile dam finally collapses under the weight of the water. That moment usually comes without thunder, without tears, only a chilling calm, as if you suddenly see everything more clearly than ever before. You no longer want to apologize. You no longer need to be accepted. You just want to be yourself, even if only once. I remember the story of Alicia, a friend who spent most of her life as the peacemaker in her family. Every conflict, every tension, She was the one who stood in the middle, listened, tried to bring everyone together, and ended up carrying all the silence and nameless sadness herself. Then, one evening, as a family argument reached its peak, Alicia didn't cry as she always had before. She sat down, looked each person in the eye, and said in a steady voice, "I will not be responsible for everyone else's happiness anymore." There was no anger, no resentment, just truth so raw and clear that everyone fell silent. That was the moment when real power finally belonged to her. Alicia's turning point didn't come from a desire for revenge or to fight anyone. It came when she realized that her gentleness was no longer enough to save everyone. She had spent her whole life pleasing others, making sure no one was uncomfortable. But when she became exhausted, when pain after pain piled up, her intuition told her that it was time to stop, to protect herself from that very breaking point. That was the moment an empath chooses truth over comfort. And that is the point of eruption. Psychology calls this phenomenon an empathic snap, a breaking point in the inner system after too many instances of being used, denied, or emotionally suppressed. In the research of psychologist Dr. Judith Orloff, 2021, empaths often reach a turning point when betrayed by someone closest to them. It might be a spouse's infidelity, a friend's exploitation, or even subtle manipulation from family members. The greatest pain does not come from the act of betrayal itself, but from the moment they realize they had seen it coming long ago, but ignored it to hold on to the illusion of love, of harmony. Another example is the story of Sam, a middle-aged athletic coach. Sam was always the one to listen to the confessions of his trainees and colleagues, always willing to help even when he was most exhausted himself. But when a close friend betrayed his trust and shifted all responsibility for a major failure onto Sam, he went through an intensely stressful night. The next morning, Sam no longer felt angry. He just felt absolute calm. That was the moment he told his friend directly, without avoidance, without compromise. "I know this isn't my fault, and I'm not carrying anyone else's guilt anymore." From that day on, Sam gradually changed his way of living, set clear boundaries, and became the kind of leader people truly respected, no longer the emotional janitor for free. So what happens inside the psyche of an empath at that turning point? It's not a sudden hardness, nor is it revenge. It's transformation when emotional intelligence and the instinct for self-protection finally find common ground, creating a state of sovereignty that outsiders can hardly shake. You stop performing, stop explaining, stop apologizing. You accept that not everyone will understand, and that does not make you any less valuable. Carl Jung wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." The turning point for the empath is when they are brave enough to accept the truth about themselves, both the light, the shadow, the gentleness, and the hidden strength within. At that moment, they no longer seek validation from the outside. They become themselves freer, stronger, yet never losing their innate kindness. Have you ever realized you stood at this threshold? It might be the moment you no longer hold back tears when misunderstood, but stand up to clearly state your boundaries. It's the day you stop trying to please everyone and accept that initial emptiness in exchange for spiritual freedom. It's when you stop playing the role of the rescuer and begin to truly live as yourself. To move through this turning point, there's a lesson I want to share. Take the time to ask yourself what is yours and what belongs to others. Setting boundaries, though frightening at first, is truly the first step to reclaiming sovereignty over your own life. Try writing a short list, the things you do only because you're afraid of disappointing others, the emotions you carry that aren't yours. Every time you dare to say no to those things, you move a step closer to inner maturity. Most importantly, that turning point is not an end, but a beginning. It opens a new path, where you are no longer swept up in the emotional vortex of others, but start to build reality from your own inner strength. It's not coldness, but maturity, a maturity strong enough to love without losing yourself. Jung once emphasized, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The most terrifying turning point is also the one that frees you from invisible chains. You no longer live to please everyone, but begin to live honestly with yourself, and only then does empathy become a strength, no longer a lingering wound. 4. The journey of transformation. From victim to balanced warrior. There are days when you may feel like a gardener who tends a garden endlessly, but the flowers never bloom. You prune, water, weed, but still only receive fading grey and barren soil in return. You wonder, what have I done wrong? Why does everyone depend on me, but I never feel nourished myself? Perhaps the journey of an empath is like a delayed spring, a place where vitality lies dormant beneath the earth, waiting for a great rain to awaken it into a proud forest of flowers. Sarah M's story begins in such a place. Sarah was a woman who had gone through 2 failed marriages, always the mother, wife, friend, listening, forgiving, healing everyone but herself. One day, after realizing she was apologizing again for a mistake that wasn't hers, Sarah stood in silence before her kitchen window, asking herself, how much longer will I keep living someone else's life? That was the moment her journey of transformation began, not with a grand decision, but with a single question, brave enough to face the darkness inside. If the first stage is recognizing the shadow, then the second stage is integration, daring to look directly at the parts of oneself that had always been denied or feared. For Sarah, that meant confronting suppressed anger, a sense of helplessness, and a deep yearning to be herself, even if just once. With the guidance of a therapist, Sarah began writing down every real feeling each day, without judgment, without censorship. She dialogued with her shadow, asking it what it wanted, what it feared, what kept it alive. No longer running away, Sarah realized that behind gentleness was pain. Behind pain was intuitive wisdom, and behind that wisdom was a source of strength never before unleashed. At a family gathering, Sarah's mother once again tried to induce guilt, just as she had done for years. But this time, instead of remaining silent or enduring it, Sarah calmly said, I understand you're in pain, but I can no longer take responsibility for that pain. In that moment, the air seemed to freeze. Every eye turned towards Sarah, anticipating a crisis. But Sarah simply smiled, stood up, and walked out into the garden, feeling free for the first time even though her heart was still trembling. That moment was proof that the stage of integration had gradually shifted into application, the ability to use new awareness to establish boundaries, to free herself from old emotional cycles. Another example is the story of Will, a former soldier entering a crisis after leaving the military. Will carried with him the legacy of sacrifice, always putting others' needs first, always showing up when someone needed him, yet never knowing how to ask for help himself. After a series of events brought Will to his knees, the loss of a close friend, divorce, unemployment, he once believed he would forever be trapped in the role of victim of fate. However, with the help of a peer support group, Will gradually learn to recognize his limiting beliefs, that men aren't allowed to be weak, that emotions are for those who are less strong. Will began to practice meditation, write in an emotional journal, learn to say no, and allow himself to put his own needs first. Transformation didn't come in a day, but in each honest moment when he dared to admit he was afraid, when he voiced his grief without shame. Over time, Will became a mentor for other veterans, helping them move through their own darkness, turning pain into a new drive to live. Will's growth is proof that transformation is a journey, not a destination, and that each of us can pass through the darkness to find balanced strength within. Here, I want to emphasize a truth. The strength unleashed during the transformation process is only truly sustainable when it is accompanied by consciousness and ethics. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Facing and accepting every aspect of oneself, even those parts that were once denied, hated, or thought of as not supposed to be, requires courage and a keen sense of moral awareness. Without that, This strength can easily be transformed into a tool to control or manipulate others, rather than being used to protect oneself and spread healing. Research by Brené Brown, 2018, points out that highly empathic people, if they do not learn to establish boundaries and develop an awareness of their inner power, are prone to slipping into a state of reacting to wounds through withdrawal, anger, or subtle manipulation. True maturity is not about cutting off emotion, but about knowing how to regulate it through awareness and love. That is why truly balanced warriors never lose their hearts. They simply learn how to keep those hearts safer, more discerning. If you feel stuck in a victim loop, ask yourself, what feelings have I hidden because I was afraid of being judged? What boundaries have I broken just to please others? And what would happen if you started to take small steps, daring to recognize, to integrate, then to apply your intuition and power for yourself first, rather than for everyone else? The lesson I have drawn after decades of working with empaths is this. Every transformation begins with an honest question to oneself, grows into small daily actions, and finally becomes a way of life where you are both gentle and resolute, both empathetic and bounded. You do not have to become invincible. You just need to become the most authentic, strongest version your heart has ever dreamed of. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." When you are brave enough to look inside, to awaken to both your darkness and your light, you are no longer a victim, nor a hardened person, but a balanced warrior, someone who can hold on to kindness in a tumultuous world, and who knows how to protect themselves from unnecessary storms. 5. The Practice Map. Transformative Exercises for Empaths. This past Sunday morning, I sat at a roadside cafe, watching people pass by, each one busy with their latte or a hurried phone call, and I wondered, if life is a long road trip, do empaths like us have a map, or are we just driving endlessly on the highway of emotions, not knowing where the rest stops are? I have met many friends, just like that they know they need to change. They crave a transformative journey, but always start with a very real question. Where should I go from here? How do I even begin? That pain is not a rare thing. Many people have shared with me the feeling of being stuck, as if they are lost on a foggy road. They deeply feel other people's sadness, carry on their shoulders worries that aren't even theirs. But when it comes to returning to themselves, they don't know what to do, where to even start transforming. Are you experiencing that feeling, standing at a crossroads, knowing you need to move forward, but not yet seeing the path ahead? I remember the first time I realized I was the same way was when a close friend of mine, Emily, texted me one Thursday afternoon. "I feel drained. I'm always trying to listen and help. But when I get home, I have no idea how to take care of my own emotions." Emily is typical of so many empaths, outwardly strong, but inwardly full of unanswered questions. She told me about the sleepless nights spent worrying about someone beyond her reach, about the confusion she felt when she had to choose to prioritize herself instead of rescuing others. The issue wasn't that Emily lacked motivation, but that she didn't know how to draw a transformation map for herself. So what is the practice map for empaths? To go from being ruled by emotions to mastering them, from being an absorber to becoming a creator of life energy. The answer is not theory, but practice small, consistent steps, practical enough that anyone can start, no matter where they are on their journey. 1. Keeping an intuition journal. One of the simplest yet most powerful tools I've ever used is the intuition journal. It's not a notebook for jotting down your to-do lists, but a space where you honestly record every feeling, hunch, and observation about others or situations you've experienced during the day. Write without censoring. I felt anxious when talking to Linda, even though she didn't say anything specific. Or, something felt off in today's meeting. The atmosphere was too heavy. Don't judge right or wrong. Just write down every signal your intuition sends you. In a study by Dr. Elaine Aron, 2019, empaths who practiced intuition journaling consistently for 30 days gradually regained their trust in themselves. They discovered that most of their emotions and premonitions were accurate, even though they had often been doubted or dismissed before. Journaling also helps identify repeating patterns. You'll notice who or what situations tend to drain your energy, and on the contrary, which spaces energize you. A typical example is an art teacher named Mark. Mark often felt uneasy and exhausted after teaching sessions, even though his students loved him. By recording his feelings daily, Mark realized that only staff meetings made him feel off, while teaching filled him with inspiration. Mark recognized it wasn't because he was too sensitive, but because of the environment and the people around him. This helped Mark start to adjust his work schedule, prioritize creative spaces, and limit exposure to negative situations. 2. Trying to set boundaries. Start with the smallest things. If you've ever found it difficult to say no, or you fear disappointing others, then practicing setting boundaries will be a major but necessary challenge. Don't think you have to start with big boundaries involving family or your boss. Begin with the smallest things. Refuse to take on an extra task when you're already tired. Excuse yourself from joining an after-hours meeting, or simply reserve an evening with no appointments just for yourself. Famed therapist Nedra Glover Torwab, 2021, once wrote that boundaries are an act of self-love, an act of loving yourself, not selfishness. She shared that her empathic clients were often very confused at first when they tried setting boundaries, afraid of being seen as cold. But after a period of experimenting, they realized, those who truly respect you will value your boundaries even more. And those who only know how to take will naturally drift away when they're no longer getting your energy and attention for free. Another example is the story of Lisa, a pediatrician who used to believe that a good doctor must always be available to her patients 24/7. After a severe burnout, Lisa began to set time boundaries. She no longer replied to work emails after 8 p.m., allowed herself a lunch break, and didn't take non-urgent calls outside of work hours. At first, her co-workers complained. But after a month, Lisa realized she was healthier, happier, and had much more energy for the cases that truly required her presence. Most importantly, she discovered she wasn't hated as she had initially feared. 3. Dialogue with the shadow, facing the hidden self. Many empaths don't realize that their inner darkness, the repressed anger, the hidden pain, the longing to be recognized is actually a crucial part of their strength. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To truly transform, you don't just write about your beautiful feelings, you must also dare to face the parts of yourself you once denied. Take some time to sit in silence, write down your most uncomfortable emotions, or imagine yourself having a conversation with your shadow. Ask it, what do you want to tell me? What is causing you pain? Many people feel scared or embarrassed to do this, but this is the very first step to unifying your inner strength. A study from the University of Toronto, 2022, shows that people who regularly practice shadow work, dialoguing with their darkness, tend to have greater emotional regulation, recover from hurt more quickly, and report higher life satisfaction than control groups. When we learn to accept all sides of ourselves, we no longer have to fight against ourselves, but instead begin to build true inner resilience. Give yourself permission to try and fail. If you've ever been afraid of making mistakes, or thought that just by reading enough books or listening to enough podcasts you would transform, I want you to pause and take a deep breath. Transformation is not a straight line, nor is it a project with a deadline. It's a winding journey. Sometimes you circle back to where you started, sometimes you stumble, but every small step brings a big lesson. Treat yourself as you would a close friend. Encourage, support, and don't judge yourself when you make a misstep. There will be days when you feel you're making progress, and days when you fall behind. That is completely normal. As long as you persist in trying, you're already ahead of so many people who never dare to begin. Carl Jung once emphasized, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. You don't need to solve all your emotional problems overnight. You just need to grow a little bit every day, enough so that the problem is no longer a burden. That is the journey of an empath's growth, from being swept away by the emotions of others, to mastering your own feelings, to learning to use your intuition to create value in your life. When you're sitting in a coffee shop, or in the middle of a busy day, remember, you are drawing your own map of transformation. Each small step, each sincere effort, is the path that takes you from feeling stuck to inner freedom. And I believe anyone who dares to embark on this journey deserves every good change that lies ahead. 6. From the individual to the community. The empath as a new beacon of awareness. One day, as I sat by the sea in the late afternoon, I watched the lighthouse in the vast ocean slowly cast its warm light across the sunset sky. The lighthouse stood there, never saying a word, never moving, but its presence was enough for every distant boat to know they were not alone, to know there was still a steady anchor amid the endless waves. Many times, I think people are just like that. Each of us can be a lighthouse, quiet, persistent, silently radiating the light of awakening and healing, even if we don't always recognize how powerful that light truly is. After all the effort spent on personal growth, when an empath finally learns to manage their emotions, to set boundaries, and to transform pain into strength, a quiet question still lingers. Am I the only one walking this path? Even after maturing, even after feeling less lost in the chaos of emotions, loneliness still knocks at the door on certain evenings, when the lights go out at home and you hear the echo of your own thoughts inside your mind. That is a very real story for many people I have met, those who have found the light within themselves, but are still longing for a community where they truly belong. Have you ever felt like a small lamp in a wide room, shining just enough for yourself, but wishing there were more lights lit, so that the darkness would not be so dense? I have felt that deeply, especially when listening to the stories of empaths who have transformed. They are happier, stronger, yet still long for a circle of community, a place where no one has to hide their sensitivity, where everyone can freely share, freely grow. One autumn evening, I received an email from a woman named Catherine. She lives in a small town and has experienced many personal upheavals, losses, and even successes. Catherine wrote, "I feel stronger than ever, but sometimes I still feel lost. I wish I could meet others who have gone through a healing journey like mine, people who understand the deep emotions I carry inside." I understand, Catherine, because that was once my own wish as well. Personal growth, in the end, does not stop with oneself, but always reaches toward connection, because only together can we truly heal. This is not just a personal feeling. A major study by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad, Brigham Young University, 2015, published in Perspectives on Psychological Science, showed that social connection has a powerful effect on both physical and mental health. Especially for those who are sensitive, community connection reduces stress, increases happiness indexes, and even lengthens life expectancy. For empaths, the sense of belonging to a community, even a small one, is the motivation to keep developing and contributing. Once you have found some healing, ask yourself, what can I contribute to this world? Does my pain and transformation mean anything to anyone else besides myself? If you have ever asked these questions, you are not alone, because a true journey of transformation always holds within it a desire to spread outwards, to help, to inspire, and to create a space where others can also grow and shine. I recall the story of a man named Daniel, a former creative director at a large company, who went through a personal crisis after losing a loved one and falling into spiritual stagnation. Daniel began his healing journey with meditation, writing, and gradually shifted towards supporting the community. He volunteered as a mentor for young people going through crises, organized emotional sharing sessions at the local library. At first, only a few people attended, mostly faces marked by exhaustion, eyes heavy with unanswered questions. But over time, those small gatherings became a sanctuary, a place where people could drop their masks, talk about their pain, listen to comfort, and rediscover hope. Daniel once shared with me, "I realized that if each person lights a small flame, eventually the whole community will shine. I don't need to save anyone. I just need to truly listen and share the peace I've found. That is also the image of a lighthouse. Not the one who leads, but the one who stands there, patiently shining so that anyone in need can find their way home. In fact, many modern psychologists also view the transformation from individual to community as an inevitable step for mature people, especially empaths. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Any genuine encounter can change both parties, you and me and the community." When an empath dares to step out of their personal comfort zone to connect with others, they not only help themselves grow, but also become a catalyst for positive change around them. Perhaps you have heard the story of Glennon Doyle, author of Untamed, who went through many hardships, self-doubt, and periods of feeling lost. Glennon transformed her personal experiences into a source of widespread strength by founding Together Rising, a community organization that helps vulnerable women and children. In an interview with the New York Times, Glennon once shared, "Healing is not a solo endeavor. When we offer our story, we offer a lifeline." This quote has been shared by many empaths as an affirmation. When we dare to speak out, to spread our experiences, that is when we create space for others to also find themselves. And it is impossible not to mention the role of modern healing communities, such as support groups on social media, sharing workshops, or simply small circles of close friends. In those spaces, people are allowed to be vulnerable, allowed to ask questions, allowed to be both givers and receivers. That is the image of resonance. Each person is a puzzle piece, and when put together, they form a larger picture of collective healing. Brené Brown, a renowned researcher on vulnerability and connection, once wrote, "Connection is the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. Only when we feel seen and heard do we truly unlock the healing potential within ourselves." That is also the message Oprah Winfrey has emphasized through hundreds of her talk shows. You are not alone. Your story matters. Those words are not just words of encouragement, but living proof of the transformative power of a loving and empathetic community. If you feel that you have come quite far on your personal journey of transformation, try to think, how can your experiences become a light for others? Maybe you don't need to start a big organization or become Oprah or Glennon Doyle. Sometimes, all it takes is truly listening to a friend, sharing a lesson during a small gathering, or sending an encouraging email to someone who has just gone through a hardship. Light doesn't need to be dazzling to be meaningful. It just needs to be warm enough to chase away a little of the darkness in someone who is lost. Carl Jung once emphasized, "As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." Every small action you take, when it comes from empathy and understanding, is a flame that lights up some corner of this world. Are you ready to step forward, to open your heart to the community, and to use your own journey of transformation to spread value? Remember, your presence, your empathy, not only help you live more deeply, but also inspire others to embark on their own journeys of growth. Looking back on the road you have traveled, you will see that every effort to overcome your personal pain is never meaningless. They form the foundation for a community of souls who know how to heal, how to love, and how to pass on their light to the next generation. That is the greatest legacy any empath can leave to life. And if tonight you once again hear the distant sound of waves or see the lighthouse blinking out at sea, smile. You too are such a lighthouse, quiet, but never alone. Because each small light, when connected together, creates a radiant dawn for an entire community. 7. Creating like an empath. Have you ever sat quietly in the early morning, when the city is still asleep, and suddenly felt a restless urge like everything is peaceful but there's still a missing piece somewhere inside you? After years of weathering emotional storms, when the pain has finally settled, you start to ask yourself, now, what will I do with this strength? What will truly make my life different? At that moment, the desire to create, to build something with your unique mark will naturally arise, like a healthy hunger of the soul. Many people think creativity is a privilege reserved for artists, musicians, or brilliant minds. But in reality, creativity is the innate power of anyone who has learned to touch the depths of their own emotions. After the journey of healing, we no longer crave just peace. We begin to long to leave a mark, to build something that never existed before, a piece of art, a project, a vibrant experience that reflects our very soul. I once met Linda, a woman of 52, who had worked as an accountant for 25 years and had gone through a painful divorce. When her personal pain was somewhat transformed through therapy, journaling, and circles of empathic friends, Linda began to feel a new surge of energy within her. One afternoon, as she was helping her young son finish an art project for school, Linda realized she was drawn in by the colors and shapes. Instead of just assisting her son, she began to try painting her own emotions onto paper. At first, there were abstract paintings, later, more everyday scenes tinged with her inner world. Not long after, Linda held her first exhibition at a small neighborhood cafe, donating all the proceeds from her artwork to an organization supporting single mothers. Linda told me, "Creativity is the most sustainable dose of dopamine I've ever known. It doesn't come from compliments, likes, or shares, but from the joy of transforming emotions into something that can touch others." Linda's most beautiful painting is one of a room with a window open to the sea, she said. That was how she poured her sadness, hope, and a part of her soul for others to contemplate. That is also why the dopamine at this stage, creative dopamine, so different from healing dopamine, becomes so important. In the research of Dr. Kelly McGonigal, Stanford University, 2021, on purpose-driven dopamine, adults who have healed themselves after trauma only truly feel happy when they participate in purposeful creative activities like painting, writing, small entrepreneurship, or volunteering. It is this kind of dopamine that helps them maintain a lasting sense of meaning, far beyond the mere stability that healing alone can bring. You can see this through the story of Michael, a middle-aged man who used to work in a technical job, living quite withdrawn after the shock of losing his job. But after a mindfulness course, Michael realized he still longed to connect, to share, and to create value. He decided to start a personal podcast, where each week he talked with an ordinary person who had an extraordinary story of resilience and emotion. At first, there were only a few dozen listeners, but gradually, Michael's podcast became a quiet corner for those searching to find themselves after a crisis. It wasn't about fame, not about reputation. What truly fulfilled Michael was the act of creating, listening, and sharing every single day. Carl Jung once emphasized, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves." Empaths, thanks to their deep inner experiences, carry within themselves a special wellspring of creativity. They don't just want to make a product, they want to infuse it with spirit, meaning, and genuine emotion. So, how can you as an empath unlock this creative hunger? Start from your own experience. Maybe it's a small piece of music you compose yourself, a blog sharing your healing journey, or a community garden for everyone to contribute and heal together. Most importantly, remember, you don't need to be perfect, only honest. Don't compare yourself to someone else's success. Instead, let yourself ask, what is it that I most want to offer to the world? You can also follow these 3 steps. Return to what once made you forget time. That could be cooking, painting, writing, gardening, leading a support group, or even starting a small YouTube channel. Transform your painful experiences into creative material, remember. What you have been through is a one-of-a-kind inspiration. No one else can tell it quite like you. Spread that value, whether it's a painting gifted to a friend, a post online, or a community project you kickstart. The creativity of empaths is to connect, inspire, and enrich the shared life of all. If you are still in doubt, try to remember the last time you did something creative and felt a wave of joy radiate from deep within your chest. That is meaningful dopamine, the reward for those who dare to live authentically with their inner world and dare to create something new. Jung also once said, "Without this playing with fantasy, no creative work has ever yet come to birth." The debt we owe to the play of imagination is incalculable. Allow yourself to play with imagination, with what you once hid away, once feared for from there. Not only will you heal, but the world around you will also gradually change. The journey of creating as an empath is never a path of perfection or achievement. It is the path of becoming where every work, every project, every mark you leave behind is a gentle affirmation. You existed, you loved, you suffered, and you overcame to create. In doing so, you become a living source of inspiration for so many others who are also searching for meaning in this vast life. 8. Living as a legacy builder. So, after all the ups and downs, what will you leave behind? Will your existence leave any trace of flavor for this life? This is not the worry of an ending, but rather a quiet beginning, a calling toward building a legacy, however small, that outlives ourselves. After a journey of transformation, the sense of fulfillment inside urges you to look outward, not obsessed anymore with who you must become, but with the question, who will receive what I have learned, what I have loved, what I have overcome? In conversations with those who have weathered great losses, I have realized one truth. They are not afraid of growing old, not afraid of becoming weak, but afraid of being forgotten, afraid that the values they have accumulated will simply disappear with the years. This is not just theoretical. You can see this image in Mrs. Mildred, a retired nurse at 67, living in a small town. After her own losses, her husband passed away early. Her children grew up and left home. Mildred spent a long time simply circling memories. But then she began to write down stories from the wartime, about how she endured difficult shifts, the moments she stood at the edge of life and death with her patients. She did not keep them for herself, but collected them into a little book to share freely with the young people studying medicine in her area. Some of her stories have spread even further, becoming a source of inspiration for many students facing the pressures of their profession. I just want them to see that even when it's very dark, kindness will always create a streak of light that stretches across generations. Mrs. Mildred once said, or take David, a mechanic who once struggled with addiction, in and out of rehab, but after his recovery and joining an empathy support group at the local church, he decided to open a free vocational class for troubled teenagers in town. David didn't have much money, but he had a wealth of lessons from his own mistakes. He taught the kids not just how to fix cars, but how to overcome shame, how to forgive themselves. In that little class, David passed on not only skills, but also hope and the belief that everyone deserves a fresh start. Stories like Mildred's and David's don't appear on the front page of the newspaper, but quietly, they create a wave of change, what Carl Jung once called the influence of one's own being. Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." Legacy doesn't lie in the big things we intend, but in the small things we actually do, day after day. Science supports this idea too. According to Dr. Erik Erikson's research on generativity versus stagnation, 1950, adults from midlife onward achieve the deepest sense of fulfillment when they know they are contributing and creating value for the next generation. It's not about fame or money, but about feeling that you have passed on lessons, kindness, or simply given someone else the motivation to live a more meaningful life. You can start building your own legacy today, whether that means writing down what you've overcome, choosing to mentor a young person, or simply creating a safe space for someone in crisis. Legacy isn't about material things, it's about the ripple effect, the way you make others feel about this life. If you find yourself not quite ready, remember, legacy doesn't have to be something grand. Sometimes, it's simply a story you share, a journal you leave for your children and grandchildren, a small act of kindness you plant in your community, or just the way you love and listen to those beside you each day. Jung once emphasized, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insolvable. They can never be solved but only outgrown. There are things we cannot solve right away, But by living, giving, and leaving traces of love, we're helping ourselves transcend the very fear of being forgotten. You may not be able to control the length of your life, but you absolutely can shape its depth and resonance. Legacy is not only what you do, but also what you touch in the hearts of others, so that one day, when you look back, you'll know your existence left a mark on this world through the love, resilience, and empathy of a seasoned soul. So there it is, my companion. We have seen that sensitivity is not a weakness. It is your evolutionary advantage when you know how to manage your boundaries. The final, core message is this: you don't need to make anyone fall in love with you. You are the light of your own soul. From now on, whenever you feel the energy of the world rushing in, remember Jung's symbol of the lighthouse. The lighthouse doesn't rush to shut off its light because of the storm. It stands strong and keeps shining. Your true confidence is the same. It is not about being fearless, but about not letting fear or other people's emotions guide your way. You have been brave enough to look into your own depths. Now is the time to dwell in that strength. You are no longer a choice because you have chosen to be yourself. If this journey speaks to you, keep this conversation with yourself, and don't forget to share it so someone else might find the lighthouse within them too. Are you ready to step into the deeper part of your individuation journey? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications today so we can continue exploring this extraordinary world of psychology together.